If you fix it in 5 minutes, I'll give you the whole company. When CEO Diane Calloway made that offhand joke to the quiet man in the contractor's uniform, she thought she was being clever. She thought she was putting someone in his place. What she didn't know was that Marcus Webb had built the very system she was standing on, and that the man she dismissed in 30 seconds had spent 5 years waiting for exactly this moment. Nexagen Systems is 72 hours away from the biggest IPO of the decade. One hidden file, one man who knows where it lives, and one woman who signed her name to a crime she didn't know she was committing. Someone is about to lose everything. It just might not be the person you expect. The elevator doors opened on the 34th floor at 7:43 in the morning, and Marcus Webb stepped out carrying a gray canvas tool bag, a laminated contractor badge clipped to his shirt pocket, and 17 years of patience that had finally run out of places to go. The lobby of Nexagen Systems looked the way money always looked when it was trying to prove something. White marble floors that reflected the ceiling lights back at themselves. A reception desk carved from a single slab of dark stone, and a wall of glass that showed the Atlanta skyline going amber in the early sun. The receptionist, a young woman with copper-painted nails and a headset that probably cost more than Marcus's car payment, looked up and then looked back down at her screen before he had fully cleared the elevator threshold. "Contractor," he said, setting his bag on the visitor counter and sliding the badge toward her with 2 fingers. "Electrical Systems, work order 7714. She scanned it without looking at him. "4th door on the left. Someone will meet you." Marcus picked up his badge and walked toward the 4th door. He did not look at the framed magazine covers on the wall. Forbes, Wired, Fast Company, each one featuring a version of Diane Calloway that had been lit and edited to look like she had been born standing in front of a whiteboard. He had seen those covers before. He had seen them in the 5 years since the name on the CoreNet licensing agreement had stopped being his. The door opened into a corridor that smelled like server heat and burned coffee, and a man Marcus didn't recognize was standing there, with the specific expression of someone who had been awake since 4 in the morning and had run out of ideas around 6. "You're the electrical guy?" The man's name badge said Derek, Senior Systems Engineer. "That's what the work order says," Marcus said. Derek turned and walked fast, and Marcus followed. Through a glass partition on the left, Marcus could see the main operations floor, 20-something workstations, most of them occupied by people who were either typing very quickly or staring at screens with the blank focus of people watching something fail in slow motion. On the far wall, a dashboard display that should have been showing green status indicators across a grid of 14 systems was showing 11 of them in red. "How long has it been down?" Marcus asked. "CoreNet went offline at 4:17, Derek said. "We have a regulatory filing due at noon and a full board presentation at 9. The IPO registration closes in 72 hours. If we can't show clean system function to the underwriters by end of day, we're looking at a delay that will cost—" He stopped himself. "Anyway, the internal team has been on it since it dropped. We think it's a cascade failure in the authentication layer, but we can't isolate the origin node." "Who designed the authentication architecture?" Marcus asked. Derek glanced at him sideways. "That's in the original build documentation." "Why?" "Because the way you fix a cascade depends on where it started," Marcus said, "and the way it started depends on who built it." Derek didn't answer that. He pushed through a door, and they were in the server room. Long rows of black racks humming in the cold air. Status lights running from green to red and back, like something breathing wrong. 4 people were already in the room, 2 of them on laptops, 1 of them on the phone, 1 of them just standing with his arms crossed, looking at a rack as though he might be able to stare it back into function. Marcus set his tool bag on the floor and unzipped it. From the outside, it looked like the bag of an electrician. Voltage tester, wire strippers, a coil of cable, a tablet in a rugged case. He took out the tablet and powered it on. "Hey!" One of the engineers looked over. "You're the electrical contractor. This isn't an electrical problem. This is a software." "I know what it is," Marcus said. The engineer looked at Derek. Derek shrugged, with the expression of the man who had stopped having opinions about solutions approximately 90 minutes ago. Marcus knelt in front of the primary rack and pulled up the diagnostic interface on his tablet. The CoreNet system was one he knew, the way he knew the layout of his own apartment, not because he had studied it, but because he had made it. The authentication layer Derek had mentioned was not, in fact, a cascade failure. It was a timeout loop in the handshake protocol between the primary and secondary verification nodes, a specific vulnerability in a design choice Marcus had flagged in 2019 and had been told by email in writing from the man who had hired him that it would be addressed in the next build cycle. The email still existed. He had copies of it in 3 places. He navigated through 4 screens on the tablet, typed a 12-character command string from memory, and waited. The room was quiet, except for the server hum and the distant sound of someone's phone ringing in the operations bay outside. 37 seconds. Then the dashboard on the wall began to change, red to green, left to right, like a string of lights coming back on after a storm. 1 system, then 3, then 7, then all 11 that had been dark, and then the final 3 that had been hanging in a warning state, and then the whole board was green, and the quiet in the server room shifted into the different kind of quiet that comes after something stops being wrong. Marcus stood up, picked up his tablet, and zipped his tool bag. "That's it," Derek said. "That's it." What was it? Authentication handshake timeout. The loop was starving the secondary node. You needed to reset the verification sequence from the primary endpoint. Marcus picked up his bag. Whoever designed this system flagged it as a known vulnerability in the original documentation. It was supposed to be patched. He was already walking toward the door when he heard heels on the tile floor behind him. A fast, decisive sound. The sound of someone who walked like every room was already theirs. "Hold on!" He stopped, turned. Diane Calloway was not quite what the magazine covers suggested. The covers had gotten her height right and her jawline right, and they had gotten the particular quality of her attention right, the way she looked at a problem or a person, with the focused assessment of someone running calculations. What they hadn't captured was the edge under it, the thing that lived just beneath the composure that said, "I have built this from nothing, and I will not allow it to be taken." She was standing in the doorway with 3 people behind her, a man in a suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, a woman with a tablet pressed to her chest, and a second man whose expression when he saw Marcus changed in a way that Marcus noticed and filed away. The man in the expensive suit was Victor Hale. Marcus recognized him from 5 years of photographs, 5 years of court filings, 5 years of knowing exactly what a face looked like when it belonged to someone who had stolen something from you and had never lost a night of sleep over it. Victor's expression in the 2 seconds before he controlled it was not surprise. It was recognition, followed immediately by something that lived in the neighborhood of fear. Diane was not looking at Victor. She was looking at Marcus. "You fixed it," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. She looked at her watch. Then she looked up at him again. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, more the ghost of one, the shape of it, without the warmth. "In how long?" Derek said from behind Marcus. 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The silence that followed had a particular texture to it, the kind of silence that fills a room when the person in charge is recalibrating. Diane looked at Marcus. She looked at his contractor badge, his gray canvas tool bag, his work boots that had dried paint on the left toe from a job 2 weeks ago. She looked at all of it, and then she looked back at his face with the expression of someone who had just been mildly inconvenienced by an outcome they hadn't predicted. "Well," she said, and there it was. The joke, the careless thing, the words that would matter more than she knew they would matter. She said it lightly. She said it to the room as much as to him, the way powerful people sometimes say things to an audience of their own making. "If you fix it in 5 minutes, I'll give you the whole company." The room laughed. Not loudly, a restrained laugh, the kind that comes from people who are relieved and therefore generous. Derek laughed. The woman with the tablet smiled. 2 of the engineers who had been in the server room made the sounds of people acknowledging a joke without committing to one. Victor Hale did not laugh. Marcus did not laugh either. He looked at Diane Calloway with an expression that he had spent 5 years practicing, the expression of a man who has heard something that lands differently than it was intended, and who has decided in the space between one breath and the next to let it land exactly that way. "I'll need that in writing," he said. Another laugh from the room, bigger this time because now it was a joke being answered with another joke, and that was comfortable for everyone. Diane's smile widened by exactly the amount that confidence allows a smile to widen when it is not threatened. "I'm sure you will," she said. She turned to Victor. "Get him whatever he needs for his invoice, and—" "I'm not here for an invoice," Marcus said. The smile stopped. The room recalibrated again, and this time the texture of the silence was different. "Excuse me," Diane said. "I'm not here for an invoice," Marcus said again. Same tone, same volume. Not aggressive, just true. "I'm here because CoreNet is built on intellectual property that belongs to me, and I've been trying to establish that for 5 years through channels that kept getting closed. I'm here because I ran out of channels." He looked at her steadily. "I designed that system. The authentication architecture you just saw me fix from memory in 4 minutes and 15 seconds from memory. I designed it in 2018 and 2019. My name was on the licensing agreement until someone changed it." The room was very still. Victor said, "Security." His voice was flat and controlled, and he was already reaching for his phone. "You can call security," Marcus said, still looking at Diane. "But before they get here, I'd like you to ask yourself one question. Ask yourself why the only person in this building who could fix your system in 4 minutes and 15 seconds is a man standing here with a contractor badge that doesn't have his real title on it." Diane looked at him for a long moment. Her expression had moved past the place where expressions are readable and into the place where people are running fast internal calculations that they don't want visible on their face. Then 2 security guards came through the door, and Marcus let them take his arms without resistance, because he had known they were coming, and because this was not the moment. This was not the moment. The moment was coming, and he had prepared for it, and the only thing he needed right now was to have said what he had said in that room with those witnesses. He was almost at the door when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was a text from his son, Caleb, 17 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of a 10-year-old Civic in the parking garage 4 floors below. The text said, "Did you get in, Dad?" Marcus typed back one word, before the security guard told him to put the phone away. Yes, outside the window, the Atlanta skyline was fully lit now, the sun off the glass towers throwing light in every direction at once. And somewhere in the server room behind him, the CoreNet system was running green on all 14 indicators, humming along on the architecture of a man whose name it had been made to forget. Diane did not go back to her office immediately after the security team escorted Marcus Webb to the holding area on the 22nd floor. She stood in the server room for 45 seconds longer than anyone expected, long enough for Derek to ask if she needed anything, and for her to say no with the kind of tone that meant he should leave the room, and for everyone else in the room to read that tone and also leave. When the server room was empty, she stood in front of the rack that Marcus had crouched in front of, and she thought about 4 minutes and 15 seconds. She had run Nexagen Systems for 8 years. Before that, she had run a software division inside a larger company that had not deserved her. Before that, she had watched her father run his own business into the ground because he had trusted a man who had smiled too easily and promised too much. She had learned from that. She had learned to evaluate people fast and accurately, and without the kind of sentiment that clouded judgment. She had learned to look at someone and know within 90 seconds whether they were what they said they were. She had looked at Marcus Webb, and she had seen a contractor, a man with a tool bag, a man in work boots with paint on them. 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The CoreNet system had beaten 3 hours and 11 minutes of combined effort from her internal engineering team, including Derek, who had a master's degree from Georgia Tech and whom she paid $212,000 a year specifically to solve problems like the one that had just been solved. She put her hand against the server rack. The metal was cold and smooth, and hummed faintly under her palm with the data moving through it. I designed that system. People said things. People said things all the time, in rooms where they were under pressure and feeling cornered and trying to buy themselves credibility. She had heard contractors claim credit for work they'd touched adjacent to. She had heard consultants describe their contributions to projects as architectural when they had written a single module. She had heard men specifically overstate their involvement in things she had built with her own hands, and she had learned to discount it. But the command string on the tablet. She had seen the screen for 2 seconds as he was turning away, and in those 2 seconds, she had seen a 12-character input that was not in any of the public documentation for CoreNet, not in the technical manuals, not in the developer guides, not in the troubleshooting frameworks that her team used. She had been thorough about that. She knew what was in the documentation because she had approved every version of it. She had not seen that command string before. She pushed off the rack and walked out of the server room and down the corridor toward the elevator. Victor was waiting for her near the reception desk, his phone in his hand, his expression composed, in the particular way his expression was always composed, like someone had taken whatever was underneath it and smoothed it flat. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. It was one of the things she valued about him. "He's in the holding suite," Victor said. "I've called legal. They'll have a trespass notice ready by 10, and we can have him." "What company did we acquire the CoreNet IP from?" Diane said. Victor paused for exactly 1/2 second. Not a long pause, a short one. But Diane had spent 8 years in the same offices as Victor Hale, and she knew the rhythm of his pauses the way she knew the rhythm of her own heartbeat. And this one was a 1/2 second longer than it should have been. "Bridgepath Technologies," he said. "The 2019 acquisition. It's in the IP portfolio summary. I can have Miriam pull the file." "Do that," Diane said. "Have it on my desk before the board meeting." "Of course." Victor fell into step beside her. About the contractor, I want to make sure we handle this cleanly. The man clearly has some kind of grievance, and we don't want it surfacing during the IPO window. Legal is already... Victor. Diane stopped walking. Why was he able to fix CoreNet in 4 minutes? He got lucky, Victor said. He probably researched the system, found a public vulnerability report somewhere, came in here thinking he could make a scene and leverage it. It's not uncommon. People target companies right before major financial events because they think the pressure will make us settle. There's no public vulnerability report, Diane said. I know that because I specifically asked Derek in February if there were any public disclosures, and he said no. Then he found something internally. A former employee, a leaked document. The command string he used wasn't in any documentation I've approved. Another pause. I can have the security team look at his tablet. If he had unauthorized access to internal documentation that's actually helpful for the trespass case, do that too, Diane said. But don't process him out until I've spoken with legal myself. She saw Victor's expression move slightly, and she said, I'm not second-guessing you, Victor. I just want to make sure we're not creating a liability by moving too fast. If this man has any legitimate claim, however thin, and we eject him without documentation, we hand him a narrative. Of course, Victor said. You're right. He said it smoothly, agreeably, the way he said most things. Diane nodded and turned toward her office. In the holding suite on the 22nd floor, Marcus Webb sat in a chair that was more comfortable than the ones in the waiting area downstairs, and less comfortable than the ones in the conference rooms upstairs, which told him precisely where the company ranked him. The room had a couch, a coffee table with a water pitcher, and a window that looked out over a parking garage. He poured himself a glass of water and drank it, and then he took out his phone and called the number he called every morning. Hey, Dad. Caleb's voice was slightly echoed. He was still in the car. Then the Civic with the cracked dashboard and the aux cord that only worked if you held it at a specific angle. Still in the parking garage, Marcus said. Yeah, there's a Waffle House across the street. Can I... Take 20 from my wallet. It's in the center console. Get breakfast and come back. Are you okay? I'm fine. Did it work? Marcus looked at the water pitcher, at the window, at the Atlanta skyline visible beyond the edge of the parking garage. It worked, he said. The first part worked. What's the second part? The second part is harder, Marcus said. The second part involves a woman who thinks she's the smartest person in the room. Is she? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about Diane Calloway standing in the doorway of the server room, the way she had run her assessment of him in the space of 3 seconds, the way the assessment had been wrong, and the way she hadn't known it was wrong, and the way she had said the words, and the way her expression had shifted fractionally when he hadn't laughed. She might be, he said. That makes it more complicated. More complicated how? Because if she's smart, Marcus said, then someone worked very hard to make sure she didn't know the right things. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, the scholarship office sent an email this morning. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. What did it say? They want a follow-up interview next Thursday. They said it's a formality. They're just confirming the final 3 candidates. A pause. I'm a final 3 candidate, Dad. Marcus closed his eyes for a 3 count. When he opened them, the skyline was the same, and the parking garage was the same, and the water pitcher was catching the morning light in a way that made a small bright shape on the wall. That's good news, he said. That's really good news, Caleb. Yeah. Caleb's voice had the quality of someone trying to keep the feeling out of their voice and not quite succeeding. I wanted you to know. Because of everything. Because of what today is. I know, Marcus said. Go get breakfast. I'm going to be a while. Okay. A pause. Dad? Yeah. Be careful. Marcus looked at the door of the holding suite, which was closed but not locked. They hadn't locked it because locking it would have made him a detainee, and that would have created its own legal problem, and the people at Nexagen were too careful to make that mistake. They had put him in a comfortable room, and they were going to wait for legal to arrive, and then they were going to present him with a document and expect him to sign it. And the document was going to say that he waived all claims against Nexagen Systems in exchange for not being charged with trespass. He had no intention of signing it. Always am, he said to his son. The legal team arrived at 9:58 in the form of a woman named Sandra Okafor, whose card said Associate General Counsel, and whose expression said she had been pulled from something more important. She sat across from Marcus at the coffee table with a folder of papers and a pen that she sat on top of the folder with the deliberate placement of someone who expected the pen to be used. Mr. Webb, she said, I want to be straightforward with you. You entered this building on a falsified work order. The work order was generated by your facilities management system, Marcus said. It was generated in response to a legitimate service request that was submitted through Nexagen's vendor portal under the company name I'm licensed under. If the work order was falsified, the falsification happened inside your own vendor management system. Sandra blinked once. The contractor badge was issued by your reception desk approximately 22 minutes before the repair was completed. He reached into his tool bag and produced a small envelope, which he placed on the coffee table beside the pen. That's a copy of the email chain confirming the service request, the vendor portal confirmation number, and the badge scan log from your own entry system, showing the time I badged in. If you'd like to pursue a trespass claim, you'll be arguing against your own documentation. Sandra looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up. The service request, she said carefully, was submitted under a company name, Webb Technical Consulting, which is registered in the state of Georgia, has been registered since 2021, and carries the appropriate licensing for electrical and systems contracting work. You can look it up. I'll wait. Sandra did not look it up, but she picked up the envelope and opened it and read through the contents with the careful expression of someone who is discovering in real time that the situation is less simple than it was presented to them. Marcus watched her read. He had prepared this envelope 18 months ago when he had started planning the specific shape of what this morning would need to look like. Not the confrontation, he had been preparing for that for 5 years, but the documentation around the confrontation. The paper that would make the confrontation survivable. Mr. Webb, Sandra said, setting the papers down, even if the entry was legitimate, the claim you're making that you are the original designer of CoreNet is an extraordinary claim. Nexagen acquired the CoreNet IP from Bridgepath Technologies in 2019. The chain of title is documented. I'm sure it is, Marcus said. The question is what the chain of title was documented with. I don't follow. I think you do, Marcus said pleasantly. But I'll be happy to explain it in front of a judge if that's more comfortable. He stood up and picked up his tool bag. I'm not signing your document, Ms. Okafor. I'm also not going to make a scene today. I came here to fix your system, which I did, and to establish publicly that I was able to fix it, which I also did. The next step happens in a different room. He looked at her steadily. You should talk to your client before the board meeting. Ask her to pull the original Bridgepath contracts. The ones from before the 2019 acquisition, not the acquisition documents themselves. Ask her to look at the named parties. He walked to the door and opened it. The security guard in the hallway straightened, uncertain. "Am I free to go?" Marcus said to Sandra. She looked at her papers, then at him, then at the door. "We are not detaining you," she said, with the precision of someone who had just decided that detaining him would be a worse problem than not detaining him. "Good," he said. He walked past the security guard to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. In the mirrored elevator doors, he could see himself. Work boots with paint on the left toe, gray canvas bag, contractor badge that said his name, and nothing else. He looked like exactly what Diane Calloway had decided he was. He pressed the lobby button, and the doors closed, and for 34 floors, he stood in the small, moving room, and he let himself think about his wife, Elena, who had died on a Wednesday in March 6 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and flowers someone had brought too early, because the treatment that might have given her more time had cost more than they had. And they had not had it because the legal battle over CoreNet had been taking everything: time, money, energy, hope. And in the end, it had taken the one thing he could not get back. He thought about Caleb, who had been 11 when Elena died, and was now 17, and sat in parking garages in old cars and sent texts that said, "Did you get in, Dad?" and meant something much larger than the words. He thought about Diane Calloway's face in the moment after the room laughed, and he hadn't laughed, and her smile had gone, still in a way that was not angry, not quite, but alert. The face of someone who had been surprised and was running fast. The question of why. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Marcus walked through the marble atrium and past the reception desk and through the glass doors and into the Atlanta morning, which was bright and warm and smelled like car exhaust and coffee from a cart on the corner. Caleb was standing beside the Civic with a Waffle House bag in his hand and his phone in the other. And when he saw his father come through the doors, he stood up straighter in the specific way he had been standing up straighter since he was 11 years old, a habit that had been growing in him like something that needed to look taller than it felt. "How'd it go?" Caleb said. Marcus took the Waffle House bag and looked inside. Hash browns, 2 orders. "It went," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." He handed the bag back. "Drive. I'll eat in the car. I need to make some calls." Caleb got behind the wheel, and Marcus got in the passenger seat, and the Civic pulled out of the parking garage into the morning traffic, and Marcus took out his phone and dialed a number he had called many times before. "It started," he said when the call connected. "Yes, the system went down exactly when I needed it to. Yes." A pause. "She's smart, James. Smarter than I expected. Or maybe I expected it and it still surprised me. She's going to pull on the thread." Another pause, longer. I know it has to be her that pulls it. It can't come from me." He looked out the window at the office towers sliding past, one after another, each one full of people sitting in rooms doing the work of building things they hoped would last. "Set up the arbitration filing, but not yet. Give it 3 days." He ended the call and took a hash brown from the bag and ate it without tasting it, watching Atlanta move around them on all sides, and thinking about what happened next. 3 days after Marcus Webb fixed the CoreNet system in 4 minutes and 15 seconds, Diane Calloway had not slept a full night. This was not on its face unusual. In the 72-hour window before an IPO registration closed, Sleep was a logistical consideration rather than a biological necessity. Something you did in installments of 3 and 4 hours between calls with underwriters and sign-offs on final prospectus language. She was used to it. She had done this before, with smaller offerings, with more chaotic timelines, with less at stake. And she knew the way her body handled it, which was to run on espresso and adrenaline until the filing cleared, and then collapse for 14 hours. What was unusual was the thing she kept returning to in the hours that were supposed to be sleep. The command string. She had not been able to stop thinking about it. She had asked Derek carefully whether the 12-character sequence Marcus had used was in any internal documentation. Derek had looked into it and come back with an answer that was technically a non-answer. It wasn't in any documentation he had access to, which was different from it not existing, which was different from what she needed to know, which was where it had come from. On the morning of the second day, she had Victor's assistant send her the BridgePath Technologies acquisition file, the full file, not the summary. She had read acquisition summaries before. What she wanted was the underlying documents, the employment contracts, the IP assignment agreements, the technical inventories. Victor had delivered them personally, which was unusual. He typically sent documents through Miriam. He had set the folder on her desk and said, "I thought I'd bring it myself in case you had questions." And she had said thank you and waited until he left to open it. The folder contained what she expected it to contain: a licensing agreement, an asset list, a chain of title from BridgePath Technologies LLC to Nexagen Systems, signed and dated in November of 2019. The signing party on behalf of BridgePath had been listed as the company's sole managing member. The company's sole managing member was not named Marcus Webb. It was a name she didn't recognize: Hartwell Consulting Group, LLC. She wrote the name down and moved on to the next document. But it stayed with her, a small stone in a shoe. Not painful, not immediately problematic, just present. On the third day, which was today, she was in her corner office at 7 in the morning when Victor knocked and came in without waiting for an answer, which was something he had always done and which she had never told him to stop. And she thought now that she should have. "The underwriters want a call at 10, he said. "Final review of the technical documentation before they submit to the SEC. And the board presentation is confirmed for 2. I think we should—" He paused. He was looking at her desk, which had the BridgePath acquisition file on it, open to the asset inventory page. "Victor," she said. "Yes." "Sit down." He sat in the chair across from her desk with the ease of long habit. Victor Hale had been her CFO for 6 years. Before that, he had been her financial advisor on the acquisition of BridgePath. He had been the one who had brought the deal to her, who had identified BridgePath as an undervalued asset with exactly the technology Nexagen needed, who had structured the acquisition so that it closed in 11 days, fast, clean, no complications. She had trusted him to do it, and he had done it. And CoreNet had become the foundation of everything Nexagen had built since. "Who is Hartwell Consulting Group?" she said. Victor's face did the thing she had noticed in the server room, the half-second delay, the smoothing. It was the holding entity BridgePath used for the IP assets. "It's in the chain of title." "I know it's in the chain of title," Diane said. "I'm asking what it is. Who are the members? Where is it registered?" "I'd have to check with legal on the specifics." "Victor, you structured this acquisition. You brought me this deal. You know what Hartwell Consulting Group is." The silence between them was different from the silences of the last 6 years. which had mostly been comfortable silences, working silences. The silences of two people who knew each other's rhythms well enough not to fill every moment with noise. This silence had an edge. It was a pass-through entity, Victor said finally. The original IP developer had structured his assets through multiple holding companies. It simplified the acquisition to consolidate through the primary entity. Who was the original IP developer? Another pause. I don't... Victor. Her voice was level, but something in it that was not quite level. A frequency below the level part that he would know to pay attention to. I have been thinking about a man with paint on his boots who fixed my most important system in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. I've been thinking about a command string that isn't in any documentation my team has access to. I've been thinking about the name Marcus Webb, which I've now heard exactly once from a man who had every reason to say it in a room full of witnesses. She folded her hands on the desk. I'm not asking you to confess to anything, Victor. I'm asking you to explain to me why the name Marcus Webb does not appear anywhere in the BridgePath acquisition file. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, because Marcus Webb was a work-for-hire contractor. His contributions to CoreNet were made under a work-for-hire agreement, which means the IP belonged to the contracting entity, not to him personally. The chain of title is clean. I want to see the work-for-hire agreement, Diane said. It's in the full legal archive. I can have it pulled. Today, she said. Before the board meeting. Of course. He stood up and she watched him go. At the door he paused and turned back, and his expression was the composed one, the one she knew. Diane, I want you to know I understand why you're being thorough. That's the right instinct before an IPO. But I've looked at this from every angle. The legal position is sound. Marcus Webb is a disgruntled contractor who built a grievance into something larger than it is. And the timing right before our registration window closes is not a coincidence. He's trying to pressure us into a settlement. Maybe, Diane said. Let legal handle it. I intend to, she said. I also intend to read the work-for-hire agreement. After he left, she turned her chair to face the window. 34 floors below, Atlanta was moving through its morning routines. Cars, pedestrians, the glint of sun on office glass. She had built this company in this city over 8 years, and she knew it the way she knew her own reflection. Every floor, every team, every line of code that ran on every server. She knew CoreNet the way a builder knows a house they've been living in long enough to stop seeing the construction and only see the rooms. She had never met anyone who could fix CoreNet in 4 minutes. She picked up her phone and called a number that was not Victor's, not legal's, not the underwriter's. It was a number for a woman named Patricia Huang, who was a former colleague and current partner at a boutique IP litigation firm in Atlanta, and whom Diane had not called in 3 years. Pat, she said when the call connected, I need an off-the-record conversation today, and I need you to run a name for me. Hartwell Consulting Group, LLC. Probably registered in Delaware, probably 2018 or 2019. See who the members are. She hung up and looked at the BridgePath acquisition file for another moment. Then she closed it, put it in her desk drawer, and stood up to prepare for the underwriter call. The stone in her shoe was still there. Marcus was at the kitchen table in the apartment he shared with Caleb when James Osei called back. James was his attorney, had been his attorney for 4 years, since the original IP claim attorney had cost Marcus everything he had saved and produced nothing except a better understanding of how long legal processes could run before bankrupting the person they were supposed to help. James was younger, sharper, and worked on contingency. I got the arbitration filing ready, James said over the phone. But there's something you should know. Victor Hale has been making calls. He's reached out to at least 2 of your former colleagues from the Bridgepath days. I don't know what he said to them, but I'm going to find out. Marcus looked at the kitchen table. On it was Caleb's scholarship application materials, a folder with the program details, a printed copy of his essay, a photograph of Caleb from his sophomore year science fair that he had put there for good luck. 17 years old, his mother's eyes, his father's tendency to take on too much and not ask for help. What colleagues? Marcus said. Derek Fountain and a woman named Alicia Morrow. She was Bridgepath's project manager in 2018. Alicia. Marcus knew that name. Alicia Morrow had been 26 years old and new to the job when Marcus had been building CoreNet, and she had been the one who sent him coffee and asked questions about the architecture and stayed late to understand the system rather than just deliver it. He's trying to find out what they remember, or remind them of what they should forget, James said. Marcus stood up and walked to the kitchen window. The view was a parking lot and the back of a dry cleaner. He had been in this apartment for 4 years. Before that, there had been a house in a different neighborhood with a yard that Caleb had grown up in, but the legal fees had made that a previous chapter. We can't wait any longer, Marcus said. I went to the building. She saw me fix it. She's going to pull the thread. I could see it in her face. She's already pulling it. But if Victor gets to the witnesses first... I know, James said. But Marcus, here's the thing. If we file now, before she finds the Hartwell connection herself, it looks like we're responding to our removal from the building. That's the narrative Victor wants. Disgruntled contractor files nuisance claim after being escorted out. If we wait until she's found the discrepancy on her own, the filing looks different. It looks corroborated. How long? Give it 48 more hours. If she's half as smart as you say she is, she is. Then she'll find it in 48 hours, and we file the same day she does. Clean filing, clean narrative. IPO window still open but compromised. That's when we have leverage. Marcus turned away from the kitchen window. In the living room, Caleb had fallen asleep on the couch with a textbook on his chest, the specific sleep of a teenager who had been awake too early and run out of adrenaline. His face in sleep looked younger than 17, the way faces do when the effort of holding an expression is finally released. Marcus thought, I have been waiting 5 years for the right moment, and in that waiting, my son has grown up in a parking lot apartment, and his mother never got to see it. 48 hours, he said. Not more. The work-for-hire agreement Victor sent to Diane's desk at 1:15 in the afternoon was 11 pages and dated October 14, 2018. It named one party as Webb Technical Solutions, not Webb Technical Consulting, which was the name Marcus had told Sandra Okafor was the name of his licensed company, and the other party as Bridgepath Technologies, LLC. It assigned all intellectual property developed under the contract to Bridgepath. Diane read it twice. The signature on the contractor's line was a version of the name Marcus Webb. It looked like a signature. It had the correct general shape of someone signing their name quickly. She put the document down and picked up her phone and called Patricia Wang. I found something, Patricia said before Diane could speak. Tell me. Hartwell Consulting Group, LLC, is registered in Delaware. It was registered in September of 2019, 2 months before the Bridgepath acquisition. The sole member is listed as an entity called Meridian Asset Holdings. And Meridian? Also registered in Delaware. Registered August 2019. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington, but the managing member of Meridian. A pause. This is where it gets interesting, Diane. The managing member of Meridian Asset Holdings is listed as Victor J. Hale. Diane sat very still. Outside her window, the Atlanta afternoon was filling with the specific golden light that came between 3 and 5 in October, the light that made everything look more solid than it was. "Victor," she said. It was not a question. He is technically the beneficial owner of the entity that sold Nexagen the CoreNet IP, which means he sold you IP that he owned without disclosing that he owned it, while serving as your CFO and fiduciary. "That's a conflict of interest," Diane said. Her voice sounded to herself like someone else's voice, composed flat, running the analysis. "That's one word for it," Patricia said. "I'd use several others. Diane, if that work-for-hire agreement with Marcus Webb is not legitimate, if his signature was falsified, or if the entity named in it didn't actually exist at the time, then Victor didn't just fail to disclose a conflict. He built a fraudulent chain of title to sell you something he either stole or fabricated. And he used your name and your company's assets to pay him for it." The silence stretched between them across the phone line. "I need to see the original BridgePath employment records," Diane said. "From before the acquisition, not the documents Victor delivered. I need the originals from an independent source. Do you know anyone who worked at BridgePath before 2019? "I can find out," Patricia said. "There's a woman named Alicia Morrow," Diane said. "She was a project manager there. See if you can find her." She paused. "And, Pat, don't tell Victor you're looking. Don't tell anyone at Nexagen." "Understood," Patricia said. Diane hung up and sat for a long moment at her desk, her hands flat on the closed folder, the gold light moving slowly across the floor of her office. 8 years. She had built this company for 8 years on a foundation that Victor Hale had helped her lay. And now she was sitting with her hands on the edge of it, looking at the possibility that something rotten had been built into the foundation before she had ever started building. She thought about the way her father had looked in the year after he lost his company, the specific quality of a person who has discovered that trust given freely had been used as a tool against them. She had promised herself she would never look that way. She picked up the work-for-hire agreement and held it up to the afternoon light, the signature on the contractor's line. She stared at it until her eyes adjusted to the resolution of the paper, the slight variations in ink pressure, the specific angle of the letters. She was not a handwriting expert, she could not say with certainty, but she had been reading contracts for 8 years, and the thing she noticed looking at the signature on the contractor's line was that it looked like someone who had signed a name rather than someone who had signed their name. There was a difference. She had always been able to feel it, even if she couldn't always name it. She put the document in her bag. At the door of her office, she stopped. On the hallway wall, one of the framed magazine covers she walked past 100 times a week without seeing. Forbes, the one from 3 years ago, the headline reading, "Diane Calloway, Building the Tech Stack of the Future." In the photograph, she was standing in front of a screen that was displaying the CoreNet system architecture. Arms crossed, looking at it the way you looked at something you owned. She kept walking. The board meeting at 2 o'clock went through its agenda with the procedural efficiency that came from people who understood that the next 72 hours were worth more than any individual concern. Diane sat at the head of the table and ran the meeting and answered the underwriter questions that Derek relayed by phone, and signed the documents that Sandra Okafor put in front of her. And through all of it, she was running a parallel process behind her eyes that had nothing to do with any of it. Victor sat to her right, as he always sat, and he was composed and helpful, and made 3 points during the financial review that were exactly as sharp and well-prepared as every point Victor always made. And she watched him do it and thought, if I'm wrong, I will have damaged something irreparably. And if I'm right, something is already damaged, and I just don't have the full picture yet. After the meeting, she found Derek in the corridor. I have a question, she said. Off the record for now. Derek looked uncertain, but nodded. The contractor who fixed CoreNet the other day, Marcus Webb. You were in the server room with him. Tell me, and I want your actual impression, not the official version. Did he fix it the way someone fixes something they've researched, or did he fix it the way someone fixes something they built? Derek was quiet for a moment. That told her he had been thinking about exactly this. The way he built it, Derek said. He didn't hesitate at a single menu, didn't cross-reference anything. The command string he used, I've been going through the developer archive and I can't find it anywhere. It's not undocumented so much as it's pre-documented, like it existed before the documentation was written. He paused. I've been doing systems engineering for 12 years, Ms. Calloway. The way he moved through those screens, I've only ever seen people move that way through code they wrote themselves. Diane nodded once. Thank you, Derek. She walked back to her office and picked up her phone. There was a contact in it she had not called in 3 days since the morning he had been escorted from her building. She had, not until this moment, had a reason she was willing to act on. She found the name the security desk had logged, Marcus Webb, contractor, and she found the cell number from the visitor log. And she typed a message, not a call, because she wanted to read it before she sent it. And she wanted there to be a record that she had been the one who reached out. She typed, This is Diane Calloway. I have some questions I'd like to ask you in person, not in this building. Tomorrow morning, if you're available, please let me know. She looked at the message for 30 seconds. Then she sent it. 40 seconds later, her phone showed a red receipt. And 20 seconds after that, a reply. I'm available. Name the place. The place Diane named was a coffee shop in Decatur called Oleander, 12 minutes from the Nexagen Tower, and far enough from it that the likelihood of running into anyone from the company was low enough to feel manageable. She arrived 7 minutes early and took a table near the back window that looked out on a small courtyard with a fig tree in it, and she ordered black coffee and sat with her hands around the cup and thought about what she was doing. What she was doing, she told herself, was due diligence. She was a CEO 48 hours away from an IPO registration, and she had discovered a potential material discrepancy in her IP chain of title. Meeting with the person who had raised the discrepancy, however unwelcomely, however inconveniently, was the responsible executive action. This was not sentiment. This was not the beginning of anything she was not in full control of. Marcus Webb walked through the door at 7:57, which was 3 minutes early, and he was not in work boots and a contractor badge. He was in dark gray slacks and a jacket over a plain shirt, and he had the appearance of someone who had always looked this way and had been dressed the other way for a specific reason. He spotted her immediately and walked to the table without looking around the room, which meant he had already looked around the room when he came through the door and had made his assessment before he was visible to her. That was interesting. Ms. Calloway, he said. Mr. Webb. She gestured to the chair across from her. Thank you for coming. He sat down. The server came and he ordered coffee and waited until they were alone again before saying anything. His stillness was notable. Not the stillness of someone holding themselves in check, but the stillness of someone who was genuinely comfortable with silence, who did not feel the social pressure to fill it. She had met very few people like that in her career. They were usually either very dangerous or very certain, and sometimes both. "You reached out to me," he said, "so I'll let you start." "I looked into the BridgePath acquisition documents," she said. The IP chain of title runs through a company called Hartwell Consulting Group, and Hartwell is owned by Meridian Asset Holdings, and Meridian's managing member is my CFO. Marcus looked at her. He did not look surprised. He looked like someone who had been waiting for a specific piece of music to start and had just heard the first note. "I know," he said. "When did you know?" "I've known about Victor's ownership structure since 2021, Marcus said. "It took me 2 years and every personal resource I had to trace it, because it was designed to be difficult to trace." He looked at his coffee when it arrived, turned the cup in his hands once. "What I didn't know, what I'm still not certain about, is whether you knew." The honesty of it was not what she had prepared for. She had expected defensiveness or strategy, or the careful positioning of someone presenting a legal case. She had not expected him to say, "I'm still not certain about anything," because that was a vulnerability, and she had not expected him to offer one. "I didn't know," she said. "I believe you," he said. "I didn't at first, but I've been watching how Nexagen operates for 5 years, and the pattern doesn't fit someone who knows. The pattern fits someone who trusts completely and doesn't check." The accuracy of that landed somewhere uncomfortable. "Is that a criticism?" she said. "It's an observation," he said. "You're very good at building and running things. You're less good at believing that people you trust are capable of deceiving you." He looked up from his cup. "That's not a weakness, unless you're standing next to someone who knows it and is using it."
She looked at him for a moment. Outside the window, the fig tree in the courtyard was moving slightly in a morning breeze. "Tell me what you know," she said. "The actual story. From the beginning." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he told her.
He had been 29 years old and 3 years out of Georgia Tech, with a degree in computer systems engineering, when he had been hired as a contract developer by BridgePath Technologies in 2017. BridgePath at the time was a small company, 8 people, focused on enterprise authentication software, and they had one product that was good but not exceptional. His job had been to rebuild the architecture from the ground up to create something that could scale to enterprise level, that was secure in a way the existing system was not, that could handle the kind of load that large corporations would put on it. He had worked on it for 18 months. He had slept in the office on a cot for 3 months of that. He had turned down 2 other contracts because he was not finished. He had built CoreNet. The original agreement with BridgePath had been a standard contract-to-license arrangement. He retained ownership of the IP and licensed it to BridgePath for commercial use. That was the agreement he had signed in 2017. In October of 2018, he had been asked by BridgePath's management to sign what they described as a formalized IP assignment as part of bringing in a new investor. He had reviewed the document. It had said the same thing as the original agreement in different words, or so he had believed. He had been 31 years old and working 18-hour days, and he had trusted the company that was paying him. He had signed. What he had actually signed, as he discovered in 2020 when he tried to exercise his licensing rights after CoreNet was folded into Nexagen, what he had actually signed was a work-for-hire reclassification that retroactively redefined his entire contribution as work performed as an employee rather than an independent contractor. It transferred all IP rights to BridgePath, and the company named in the document as the contracting entity was Webb Technical Solutions, not Webb Technical Consulting, his actual company name, which differed by one word and had a different tax ID.
The signature, Diane said.
Not mine, Marcus said. I've had 2 handwriting experts confirm it. The signature on the work-for-hire agreement is close enough to fool someone reading quickly, but it's not mine. He looked at her steadily. Someone signed my name to a document I never saw. Diane was quiet. She was thinking about the document she had held up to the afternoon light in her office. The signature that looked like someone signing a name rather than their name. Who? She said. Who signed it? I don't know whose hand, Marcus said. I know whose interest it served. He paused. Victor Hale was already working with Bridgepath as a financial consultant before he became your CFO. He brought you the Bridgepath deal, correct? Yes. He knew the CoreNet IP was the most valuable asset in the acquisition. He knew that if I retained ownership of it, the acquisition would need to negotiate directly with me, which would have been complicated and expensive. So the IP was taken from me, run through a holding company he controlled, and sold to you. He made money on both ends, on the structuring fees for the acquisition and on the sale of the IP through Hartwell.
How much?
Diane said. Based on the acquisition price and the IP valuation, my estimate is between $4 and $6 million personally. He looked at the fig tree in the courtyard. CoreNet is now valued at approximately $400 million in your IPO prospectus. The number sat between them on the table, like something that had weight. I'm sorry, Diane said. The words came out before she had decided to say them. She had not expected to say them. She was not a person who said things before she had decided to say them. Marcus looked at her. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but in the way that happens when something unexpected has registered and is being considered. You're apologizing, he said. My company benefited from what was done to you, Diane said. I didn't authorize it, but it happened under my name and with my signature. I'm not apologizing for Victor. I'm apologizing for the part of this that my trust made possible. He was quiet for a moment. That's not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? Legal positioning, he said. Maybe an offer? I'm not in a position to make an offer yet, she said. I haven't verified everything you've told me, and I'm not going to make commitments based on one conversation. But she stopped, started again. I've been running a company for 8 years. I know what it sounds like when someone is performing a claim, and I know what it sounds like when someone is telling me something that happened to them. You sound like the second kind. What's the difference? He said. Performance has a shape to it, she said. It builds toward the point it wants you to reach. What you're doing is different. You keep saying things that work against your case, that you're not certain I was involved, that you signed a document without reading it closely enough, that you waited too long. Those aren't things a performance includes. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, My wife died in 2018. In the middle of it, we were dealing with her illness and the legal fight at the same time, and I didn't. I missed things I shouldn't have missed. That's a thing that happened, and it's not anyone else's fault. He said it the way someone says something they have said many times in their own head and have finally gotten to a place that is not raw, but is also not gone. I'm telling you because it's relevant to the timeline, not because it's an argument. Diane set her coffee cup down. She thought about her father. She thought about the year the business failed and what had been lost in that. and what kind of decisions a person made from a place of grief and exhaustion, and how the people who were supposed to be on your side sometimes found the exact shape of that exhaustion and used it.
What do you want?
She said. Not legally, not for the arbitration. What do you actually want? He thought about it. For a genuine moment, she could see him thinking, not performing thinking. I want my name on what I built, he said. CoreNet is a good system. I spent 18 months making it good. I want the people who use it to know who made it. He paused. My son is 17. He's applying for a scholarship. He grew up watching his father fight a legal battle that never seemed to get anywhere, and I want him to see it get somewhere. That's what I want. The fig tree moved in the courtyard. My lawyers are going to hate this conversation, Diane said. Probably, Marcus said. My CFO is going to be considerably more upset than my lawyers. I expect so. She looked at him across the coffee cups and the table and said, I need 72 hours. The IPO window closes, and then I can move on this without the risk of it being framed as a hostile action to kill the offering. I know about the IPO window, Marcus said. I scheduled the server outage for the week before it closed. I wasn't planning to destroy your company, Ms. Calloway. I was planning to make you look at what you were standing on. I know, she said. That's why I'm sitting across from you in a coffee shop instead of a deposition room. She stood, and he stood. They were almost the same height, which she noticed, and which did not matter, and which she noted anyway. 72 hours, she said. I'm going to move on this, but I need to do it in the right sequence, or Victor will find a way to characterize it as a company crisis and use it to force a board vote. I need him off balance before I make the formal move. What's your plan? Marcus said. I don't have one yet, she said. I'll have one by tonight. She walked out of the coffee shop and into the Decatur morning. Behind her, the fig tree went on moving in the breeze, and Marcus Webb sat back down at the table and looked at his coffee and thought about 72 hours and whether they were enough and what was at stake if they were not. He thought about Caleb's scholarship interview on Thursday. He thought about the metadata in the CoreNet system that had been sitting in a locked layer for 5 years, waiting for a 12-character malt string that only one person alive knew. He thought about Elena, who had always said he was too careful for his own good, and who had been right about it, and had been right about most things, and whom he missed with a specific calibrated grief that had learned over 6 years to take up exactly as much space as he could afford to give it without losing the rest. He finished his coffee and paid for both cups because she had left without paying, and he had noticed, and he thought that was probably as accidental as any reflex is after years of practice. And he put on his jacket and walked out into the morning with 17 years of patience that had perhaps finally found its moment. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table while Caleb did homework on the couch, and James Osai called. Alicia Morrow called me, James said. Victor Hale called her 2 days ago, told her that a former contractor named Marcus Webb was spreading false claims about CoreNet, and that if she was contacted by anyone, lawyers, press, regulatory bodies, she should refer them to Nexagen Legal and not make any independent statements. He warned her off, Marcus said. He tried to, but Alicia called me instead of Nexagen Legal, which tells you something about how that conversation went for Victor. A pause. Marcus, she kept records. She kept everything from the Bridgepath days because she liked you, she told me. She said you were the only person at Bridgepath who actually explained to her how the system worked, who treated her like she was there to understand it and not just deliver it. She has emails. She has an internal project log from October 2018 that lists you as the sole architect. She has a draft of the original licensing agreement with your name on it, the real one, before whatever Victor did to the documentation. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. He had not known about the project log. He had not known Alicia had kept it. "Will she testify?" he said. She already said yes. A pause. "She said to tell you she's sorry it took this long. She said she didn't understand what had happened until the acquisition was complete, and by then she didn't know what to do with what she had." "Tell her thank you," Marcus said. He looked across the room at Caleb, who was reading something and had the focused, slightly absent expression of someone deep in a text. On the coffee table beside him was the scholarship folder with a photograph from the science fair. His mother's eyes, his father's habits. 6 more years of schooling ahead of him, if the scholarship came through. An entirely different kind of possible, if it did. "James," Marcus said, "how solid is our filing?" "Solid," James said. "Alicia's documents, plus your metadata access, plus the chain of title analysis, is 3 independent lines of evidence. Any one of them alone would be enough to open discovery. Together, they make Victor's position essentially indefensible. And the timing? The IPO registration window closes in 48 hours. If we file today, it becomes a material disclosure event that could delay or kill the offering. If we file after the window closes, the offering proceeds, but we lose the leverage of the window. Marcus thought about the coffee shop, the fig tree. 72 hours. "Hold the filing," he said. 48 hours. "Marcus, she's moving on Victor herself," he said. "If she gets there first, the narrative is better for everyone. It's not a contractor versus a CEO. It's a CEO who discovered her CFO committed fraud and is taking action. That's a company that cleans up its own problems. That makes the IP resolution easier, not harder. And if she doesn't get there in 48 hours, then we file," Marcus said. "And whatever happens to the IPO happens." "The scholarship," James said quietly. "I know," Marcus said. He knew. If the IPO was disrupted and the resulting news coverage tied his name to it in the wrong way, the scholarship committee would see it. Associations were not the same as guilt, but they functioned the same way in the minds of committees making decisions under time pressure. "I know," he said again. "Hold the filing. 48 hours." He put the phone down and looked at the scholarship photograph on the coffee table. And then he looked away from it, because looking at it directly for too long had never helped him make better decisions, only more frightened ones. And he was done making frightened decisions. He had made frightened decisions for 5 years, and the one thing he could say about them was that they had cost him things he could not get back. He was done. On the morning of the board meeting, Diane Calloway woke at 5 and was at her desk by 6. She had slept 4 hours, which was sufficient. She had spent the hours before sleeping building the sequence in her head, the order of things, the timing, the exact words she would need for the exact moments. Because she had learned long ago that the right words in the wrong order were just as useless as the wrong words. And this morning would require both to be correct. Victor arrived at 7:30, as he always did, and he knocked and came in, and she had coffee ready for him, which she sometimes did, and they sat across from each other at the small table by the window, the way they had sat 1,000 mornings before. And she looked at him across the cups and thought, "I trained myself very carefully not to make the mistake my father made, and I made a version of it anyway." "Big day," Victor said. He was composed as always, ready as always, She had always valued his readiness. She understood now what it had been ready for. "The final board presentation," she said. "Full IP documentation review and the motion to approve the registration filing. Yes." "Legal has everything prepped. Sandra is already downstairs." "Good." She took a sip of coffee. "Victor, I want to do something slightly different this morning. Before we go into the formal documentation review, I'd like to walk the board through the CoreNet architectural history. The original build, the BridgePath acquisition, the IP chain of title." Victor's cup paused halfway to his mouth. A small pause, the kind she had learned to see. "That's not on the agenda," he said. "I'm the CEO. I can adjust the agenda." She looked at him pleasantly. "I think it's good for the board to understand what they're approving. We're asking them to sign off on an IP portfolio with a $400 million valuation. They should know the history of the asset." "Of course," Victor said. He set his cup down. "I'll have Miriam prepare a summary." "I've already prepared it," Diane said.
I've been working on it since last night.
Something moved through his eyes that was not quite the composed expression, not quite the smoothed-over face. A calculation, rapid and, she thought, frightened. Not the fear of someone who is guilty and has been caught, not yet. The fear of someone who is guilty and is trying to determine very quickly whether they have been caught.
"That's thorough," he said.
"I try to be," she said. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. At 8:45, Diane was in the boardroom with Sandra, going through the presentation, when her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia Huang. "Alicia Morrow's documents match what you described. The project log is time-stamped. Webb's name is the only architect named on CoreNet for the full development period. I have a forensic accountant ready to look at the Hartwell chain when you're ready." Diane typed back, "After the meeting, stand by." She put her phone face down on the table and looked at the presentation screen at the front of the boardroom, which was showing the Nexagen Systems logo, and below it the words, "CoreNet, the architecture of our future." The board members arrived between 8:50 and 9, filing in with a particular focused energy of people who had been briefed that this was the final meeting before a significant financial event. There were 8 of them, 4 men and 4 women, 3 of whom had been on the board since before the CoreNet acquisition, and 5 of whom had joined after. She knew all of them. She had chosen most of them. Victor came in at 8:58 and took his seat to her right. The meeting opened. She ran through the underwriter update, the registration timeline, the final SEC disclosures. Then she moved to the IP section. "Before we go to the formal motion," she said, "I want to do something I should have done at every board meeting for the past 4 years, which is walk us through the full history of our most valuable asset." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline. CoreNet was developed between 2017 and 2019 by a contractor named Webb under a licensing agreement with BridgePath Technologies. We acquired CoreNet through BridgePath in November of 2019 for a total consideration of $12 million. She clicked to the next slide. The chain of title displayed as a diagram. The chain of title runs from BridgePath through an entity called Hartwell Consulting Group, which held the IP during the acquisition to Nexagen. This is standard. She clicked again. What is not standard is that Hartwell Consulting Group is a Delaware LLC whose managing member is Meridian Asset Holdings. And Meridian Asset Holdings is controlled by our CFO, Victor Hale. The room was absolutely silent. She did not look at Victor. She looked at the board members and watched the information arrive in each face in sequence, the way a wave arrived at a shore, each person a moment behind the last, each person reaching the same place. "What this means," Diane continued, her voice as even as she could hold it, "is that Victor sold Nexagen intellectual property that he owned without disclosing that he owned it while serving as our CFO and fiduciary. That is a breach of fiduciary duty and a material conflict of interest." She clicked to the next slide. "Additionally, the work-for-hire agreement used to establish BridgePath's ownership of the CoreNet IP contains what forensic handwriting analysis has identified as a non-authentic signature, a signature purporting to be Marcus Webb's that is not, in fact, his. If that signature is falsified, the entire chain of title is potentially fraudulent." Evelyn Torres, the board chair, said very quietly, "Victor?" Victor said nothing. He was looking at the screen. His expression was, for the first time in 6 years, entirely uncontrolled. Not the smoothed-over face, not the composed, ready face, but something underneath all of that, which was raw and alarmed and calculating all at once. "I'd like to offer Victor the opportunity to respond," Diane said. She looked at him now, directly. "Victor, is there anything you'd like to say to the board?" He looked at her. In his eyes, she had seen a lot in people's eyes over the years, in the moment when a thing they thought was hidden became visible. What she saw in his now was not guilt in its simple form. It was more complicated than that. It was the look of someone who has built something intricate, who has maintained it for years, who has believed they were good enough at the maintenance to keep it standing, and who is watching it come down. "I need to speak with my attorney," Victor said. "Of course," Diane said. She looked at Sandra. "Please make sure Mr. Hale has access to a conference room and a phone." She looked back at the board. "In the meantime, I'd like to table the IPO registration motion pending an independent IP audit. I've already engaged an auditor. The audit can be completed within 72 hours, the same timeline as the registration window." She looked around the table. "I want this offering to go forward. I intend to make it go forward, but not on a chain of title that has integrity questions. We audit, we resolve, we proceed." Evelyn Torres looked at the other board members. Around the table there were nods, not enthusiastic nods, not happy nods, but the nods of people who recognize a responsible decision when it is offered to them, and understand that the alternative is worse. "All in favor of tabling and proceeding with the independent audit," Evelyn said. The vote was 8-0. Victor pushed back his chair and stood. He said to Diane very quietly, so that only she could hear it, "You have no idea what you've opened." "I'm beginning to have some idea," she said. Same volume, same tone. "You should call your attorney." Victor. He walked toward the door. He did not make it to the hallway. In the hallway, his phone was buzzing. On the boardroom screens, on every screen in the boardroom simultaneously, because the screens were linked to the CoreNet network display, because CoreNet ran through every digital surface in the building, something had appeared. Text. White on dark background. A list of entries, each one time-stamped, each one labeled with a version number. At the top of the list, a name, Marcus Webb, Principal Architect, CoreNet version 1.0, Genesis build, October 2017. Below it, 18 months of version history, each entry showing modifications, additions, refinements, and in each entry the same name, the same role, Principal Architect, Marcus Webb. The complete authorship record of a system that had been built by one person and attributed to an entity that had never existed. At the bottom of the list, a line of text in smaller font. This record has been sealed and authenticated by digital cryptographic signature since February 12, 2019. It can be retrieved only by the primary architect using the Origin authentication key. The boardroom was very quiet. Victor stopped in the doorway. He was looking at the screens. Diane was looking at the screens. 8 board members were looking at the screens. Diane's phone buzzed. She looked at it. A message from an unknown number. One line. "That's what I came here for. M.W." She looked at the screens for another moment. Then she looked at Victor, who was still in the doorway, his phone in his hand, and whose expression had finally resolved into something simple. A man who has run out of positions to take. "Victor," she said, "go call your attorney." He went. Evelyn Torres came to stand beside Diane, and they both looked at the screens for a moment together. "Well," Evelyn said, "that changes the audit scope." "Yes," Diane said, "it does." Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number she recognized. James Osei, attorney. She had looked him up 2 days ago after the coffee shop. She answered. "Ms. Calloway," James said, "my client wanted me to let you know that the arbitration filing he had prepared is being withdrawn. He's proposing a mediated IP resolution instead of litigation. He believes you and he can reach a fair agreement without a courtroom." Diane looked at the boardroom screens, where 18 months of her company's foundational history had just rewritten itself in real time. "Tell him I agree," she said, "and tell him the audit comes back clean on everything else, and we can move forward on both fronts together." "I'll tell him," James said. She hung up and stood in the doorway of her boardroom, looking at the screens and the board members gathering their things, and Sandra already on the phone with the auditors, and all of it, the 8 years of building and the 6 years of not knowing, and she felt the weight of it settle in the specific way that truths settle when they finally come to rest. Heavier than you expected, and in some way still a relief. But it was not over. The screens showed a record. The record was not a resolution. Victor was in a conference room downstairs making phone calls, and a man with his resources and his specific kind of intelligence did not make phone calls to accept defeat. He made them to find the next position. She knew him well enough to know that. And Caleb Webb's scholarship interview was in 48 hours, and the news about Nexagen would break before then, because things like this always broke before the moment you needed them not to. She stood in the doorway of her boardroom, and she understood that the twist of the morning, the thing she had orchestrated, the thing Marcus had triggered, had opened something that was not yet finished. The news broke at 2:17 in the afternoon, which was 3 hours after the board meeting ended and 47 hours before Caleb Webb's scholarship interview. Marcus was in James's office when it broke a Bloomberg alert, then a Reuters item, then a cascade of financial news feeds that processed the board meeting minutes the way financial news always processed things, quickly, reductively, and without the context that would have made it accurate. The headline that ran most places was some version of Nexagen Systems CFO steps down amid IPO fraud allegations, offering in jeopardy. James put his phone down and looked at Marcus. "The scholarship committee will see this," he said. It was not a question. "I know," Marcus said. "Your name is in the Reuters piece. It describes you as the contractor at the center of the fraud claim." "Not the claimant," Marcus said. "The contractor at the center of the claim. That's the framing that was always going to happen." "Marcus." "Call Patricia Huang," Marcus said. "Tell her I want a statement ready by 4 o'clock that clearly describes my role as the original architect and the claimant, not a subject of investigation. Distinguish me from Victor in every sentence." He stood up. "I'm going to the Nexagen building." "Why?" James said. Because Victor Hale is still in that building, Marcus said, and I'm not going to let this get resolved in the press before I see it resolved in person.
James looked at him for a moment.
The arbitration proposal is still on the table, Marcus said, but I need to be in the room first. He drove to Nexagen.
The lobby, when he walked in, had the quality of a building that has been shaken by something it has not yet processed. The receptionist with the copper nails was on the phone with a pinched expression. Two people near the elevator were talking in low voices and stopped when he came through the door. And the security guard, who had once escorted him to a comfortable room on the 22nd floor, was standing near the desk with an expression of uncertainty that looked like it had been there for hours. Marcus walked to the desk. "I'm here to see Diane Calloway," he said. "She's expecting me." The guard looked at his ID, looked at the screen, looked at him. "1 moment," he said. The moment lasted 4 minutes, and then the elevator opened, and Diane's assistant, a young man named Patrick, who moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had survived 3 board crises, came out and said, "Ms. Calloway is in conference room B. I'll take you up." Conference room B was on the 28th floor, not the boardroom floor, and it was smaller, a round table, 8 chairs, a window that showed a different angle of the Atlanta skyline than the one from Diane's office. Victor Hale was seated at the table, and across from him was a man Marcus did not recognize, who had the look of someone's very expensive attorney. Sandra Okafor was there, and Diane was there standing near the window. When Marcus came through the door, Victor looked up. The look that passed between them in that moment was not the look of strangers. It was the look of 2 people who have been in the same room for a long time without being introduced, who have known each other by reputation and consequence, and the specific shape of the damage they have done to each other's lives, and who are now finally in the same physical space at the same time. Victor said, "Mr. Webb." His voice was controlled. He was leaner in this version of himself than in the server room version. The smooth composure was still there, but it was working harder now, the seams of it visible in a way they hadn't been. "Mr. Hale," Marcus said. He sat down. Diane moved from the window to the table. Sandra Okafor had a pen in her hand and a yellow legal pad in front of her that had 8 lines of handwriting on it already. "Victor has asked for a resolution framework before the arbitration filing is formalized," Diane said. "He believes there are aspects of the chain of title that can be explained in a way that the chain of title is not explicable," Victor said, and there was something in his voice now that was not composure, that was the edge underneath the composure finally surfacing. Pressure that had been building all morning, finding a seam. "What I'm asking for is the recognition that the structure I built was legal. The pass-through entity was legal. The IP assignment was. The signature on the work-for-hire agreement is not Marcus's," Diane said. "We are past the point where the structure of the transaction is the question. You can't prove that in court," Victor said. "Handwriting analysis is not definitive. The metadata record in CoreNet is cryptographically signed and time-stamped," Marcus said. "It was sealed in February of 2019, 8 months before your acquisition closed. You can't argue it was fabricated to support my claim because the cryptographic timestamp predates the claim by 6 years." He looked at Victor steadily. "You've had 12 hours to find a position, and I'm telling you, there is no position. The only question is whether this resolves in a way that lets everyone involved come out with something, or in a way that lets no one come out with anything." Victor's attorney leaned over and said something quietly. Victor listened, and then said,
What are you proposing? Marcus looked at Diane. Diane said, Marcus has proposed a co-ownership resolution. Nexagen retains commercial rights to CoreNet. Marcus's name is formally recognized as original architect in all documentation filings and public disclosures, including the IPO prospectus. A retroactive licensing fee is paid to Marcus for the period of use without attribution, the amount to be determined by the independent auditor. And Victor? She looked at Victor directly. Victor cooperates with the forensic audit and returns the proceeds of the Hartwell transaction. All of them, Victor said. All of them, she said. Plus whatever the auditor finds in the kicker fees from the acquisition structure. And if I don't? Then the arbitration filing goes in this afternoon, Diane said. And the FBI referral for wire fraud goes in tomorrow morning. And you explain to a federal jury how Meridian Asset Holdings came to be the beneficial owner of the IP you sold your own client. Her voice was steady in the way it was steadiest when she had made a decision and was no longer weighing it. I've already spoken with the board. This is what they've authorized. It's what I'm recommending. And I'll tell you, Victor, because you've known me for 6 years. And I think you know I don't make empty offers. This is the only offer you're going to get from this table. After we walk out of this room, it goes to lawyers. And from there, you know how long it takes and what it costs and what it looks like for everyone in it. The attorney leaned over again. Victor listened longer this time. He was looking at the table surface, the grain of the wood, the reflection of the window in the finish. Marcus watched him and thought about the 6 years of mornings that had led to this table and this window and this man's face in the process of finally running out of road. Victor looked up. He looked at Marcus. Whatever he had expected when he had signed that document, when he had structured those entities, when he had built that chain of title, whatever version of this moment he had imagined in the years when it was still theoretical, Marcus could see that it had not included this. It had not included sitting across from the man he had taken it from. I want immunity on the criminal referral, Victor said. That's not ours to give, Diane said. That's the Department of Justice. What we can do is not initiate the referral ourselves. If the audit comes back clean on everything except the IP transaction and the Hartwell proceeds, and you cooperate fully, we document our side of the resolution, and we let the DOJ make their own determination from public filings. We don't add fuel. Another long moment. The attorney said something, and this time Victor didn't lean in to hear it. He said, still looking at Marcus, How much is the retroactive license fee? The auditor will set it, Marcus said. But I'll tell you what I told Diane. I'm not here to take the company. I built that system because I loved building it. I spent 18 months making it good, and it is good. It still is. I want what was taken from me, the credit and the compensation for what I created. I don't want to watch something I built get torn down. Victor looked at him for another moment. Then he said, Fine. The attorney began writing. Diane looked at Marcus across the table, and something passed between them that was not a smile. They were in a conference room with attorneys, and the work of it was not finished, and this was not the moment for smiles. But it was an acknowledgement, person to person, of the specific difficulty of arriving at a right thing through a wrong path. They were in the hallway outside Conference Room B at 4:30 when Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a text from Caleb Dad. The scholarship office called. They said there's a news article about you and Nexagen, and they need to reschedule the interview. Marcus read it twice. He read it the way he read things he had been afraid of carefully, so the full shape of it landed before he responded.
He stepped away from Diane and the attorneys and walked to the end of the hallway to the window that looked out over the city and called Caleb. "Hey." Caleb's voice was doing the thing it did when it was working to sound fine. "It's okay, Dad. We can reschedule. I wanted to tell you." "What did they say exactly?" Marcus said. "They said they saw the news and they're pausing all final interviews, pending clarification. They said they'll be in touch." A pause. What does pending clarification mean? It means Marcus thought that someone on a committee made a decision out of caution and will not unmake it without a reason to. It means the timing was bad, and bad timing is no one's fault, and it costs the same as if it were. "It means we need to send them a clarification," Marcus said. "What kind?" "The kind that comes from a journalist writing about what happened today, not the social media version." He turned back to look down the hallway, where Diane was speaking to Sandra Okafor in a low voice. "Give me 20 minutes. He walked back to Diane. "I need something from you," he said. "Tell me," she said. He told her about Caleb, the scholarship interview, the text. He told her in the same way he had told her things in the coffee shop, without positioning, without performing, the need, just the facts, and what was needed. Diane listened. She did not say she was sorry, which he was grateful for, because he didn't need sorry right now. He needed something useful. "Evelyn Torres chairs the board of the Marcus Foundation," Diane said. It was a sentence that didn't seem to connect, and then it did. The Marcus Foundation was one of Atlanta's largest educational scholarship programs. She has relationships with every scholarship committee in the city. I can call her now. I can't guarantee anything, but I can make sure the right version of today's story reaches the right person tonight. That's all I'm asking, Marcus said. Diane pulled out her phone and walked to the window at the end of the hallway and made the call. Marcus could hear the one side of it, Diane's voice, clear and unhedged, saying, "What happened today is the opposite of a fraud claim against Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb is the person who was defrauded. He came forward. He's the one who brought this to light. That's the story, Evelyn." Marcus looked at the Atlanta skyline in the window at the other end of the hallway. The afternoon light was doing what it did in October, turning everything golden and slightly unreal. The way things looked when you had been running on adrenaline for longer than you should, and the day was finally visibly beginning to tip toward its end. His phone buzzed. Caleb again. "Did you fix it?" Marcus smiled. He typed back, "Working on it." "That's not an answer," Caleb typed. "It's the honest one," Marcus typed back. Then he added, "It's going to be okay. I mean it this time." He had said those words before over the years, and he had meant them each time, and some of the times they had not been true. This time felt different in a way that was not just hope, but was based on the specific, observable evidence of the afternoon. Victor at the table. The auditor confirmed the co-ownership framework being drafted. Diane on the phone with Evelyn Torres. The metadata on the boardroom screens that was still there, still showing 18 months of version history with his name at the top. "I know," Caleb typed. "Then I believe you." Diane found him at the window when the call ended. "Evelyn is making 3 calls tonight," she said. "The Scholarship Foundation has a board member on the committee for the one Caleb applied to. It's not a guarantee, but the version of the story that reaches them will be accurate." "Thank you," Marcus said. She stood beside him at the window for a moment. Below them, Atlanta was going about the business of mid-afternoon traffic building on the highway, the light shifting on the office glass, the particular kinetic quality of a city that is perpetually in the process of becoming something it wasn't 5 years ago. "Can I ask you something?" she said.
Yes, he said. The server outage. You said you scheduled it. I did. You killed the lib. Sorry. She stopped, shook her head. The vulnerability. You said it was supposed to be patched, but it wasn't. You knew it was still there. I kept track of it, Marcus said. For 5 years, every time Nexagen released a CoreNet update, I checked the changelog against the known vulnerability list. No one ever patched it because no one who would have patched it knew it was there. He looked at the window. I triggered it remotely from the vendor portal. It took me 11 seconds. And you timed it for the IPO window. I needed to be able to fix it in front of witnesses, he said. I needed the fix to be undeniable. If I had done it on a random Tuesday, someone would have found a way to explain it away. He paused. The IPO window meant you couldn't afford to look away. That's cold, she said. Yes, he said. I mean that as a compliment. He looked at her. I know. They stood for a moment in the specific way that people stand when they have been through something together that was not the thing either of them planned, and that has rearranged the furniture of the situation in ways that are not yet fully understood. The co-ownership structure, Diane said. When the audit resolves and the IPO goes through, and it will go through, the foundation is clean. It's only the chain of title that has the problem. I want to do something formal. A credit in the documentation isn't enough. I want your name on the system in a way that's visible, public, not buried in a technical footnote. Marcus looked at her. Why? Because it's right, she said. Because $400 million of value was built on something a man spent 18 months of his life creating and then lost because someone he trusted used the trust against him. Because I've been running this company on your architecture for 5 years without knowing it. She paused. And because I'm going to have to stand in front of my board and my underwriters and my employees and explain what happened. I'd like to be the kind of person who explains it right. The kind of person your father wasn't given the chance to be, Marcus said. He said it carefully, not as an accusation, because he had heard the story she hadn't quite told him in the coffee shop, the outline of it, the shape of the loss. She was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. He nodded. Then, yes. The public credit, the prospectus attribution. Whatever the auditor determines is the fair licensing figure, I'll accept it. He paused. I was never trying to destroy this company, Ms. Calloway. I was trying to be seen. That's all this was ever about. Diane, she said. Diane, he said. Outside the window, the October sun was laying its gold light across the city in long horizontal lines, the kind of light that made everything it touched look like it had been chosen for exactly the place it occupied. And the CoreNet system was running green on all 14 indicators in every server in the building, the way it had run every day for 5 years, on architecture that had been waiting with considerable patience to be properly introduced. The IPO registered on schedule 41 hours after the board meeting, following the fastest independent audit in the career of the firm. Diane had engaged 3 people working through the night on documentation that, once you knew where to look, was clean everywhere except where it wasn't. The prospectus that filed with the SEC named Marcus Webb as the original architect of CoreNet in the technical disclosure section, in language that was not a footnote. Victor Hale resigned the same day the audit completed. The Department of Justice opened a preliminary inquiry 6 weeks later, based on public filings. Marcus's attorney filed no referral. He had said he wouldn't, and he didn't. The scholarship committee reviewed Alicia Morrow's statement, which Patricia Huang had helped draft,
and which named Marcus Webb's role in the CoreNet development with the specificity of someone who had been in the room. They also reviewed a letter from Evelyn Torres, written on personal stationery rather than foundation letterhead, which described Marcus Webb as a person of integrity, and the scholarship as an investment that his family had already demonstrated the value of. The interview was rescheduled for the following Thursday. Caleb wore the blazer he had borrowed from Marcus, which fit him better than either of them expected, and he answered the committee's questions the way he answered most things, directly, without performing confidence he didn't have, or hiding the kind he did. When they asked him about his father, he said, "My dad spent 5 years waiting for the right moment to prove something he already knew was true. I think that's the kind of patience you only have if you believe in what you're waiting for." He said it like it was a simple fact, because, to him, it was. He got the scholarship. On the evening the notification arrived, Marcus was at the kitchen table with the lights on and Caleb's college application materials spread in front of him, going through the financial aid forms, with the specific focus of someone who no longer has to do mental math about whether this is possible. Caleb came into the kitchen with his phone in his hand, and his face doing the thing it did when something he had held at arm's length for safety had finally been allowed to be real. His mother's eyes open. "Dad," he said. Marcus looked up. "I got it," Caleb said. Marcus sat for one moment with that landing in him, not dramatically, not explosively the way it might have if he had been a person who allowed himself to feel things before they were certain. Just the arrival of it, the solidness. 5 years, and some version of his whole adult life, and the specific arithmetic of everything lost against everything still possible. And his son standing in the kitchen doorway with his phone and his mother's eyes saying, "I got it." "Good," Marcus said. His voice was not quite right, and he did not attempt to fix it. "Come here." Caleb came to the table, and Marcus stood up and put his arms around his son, in the way fathers hold their children when they are 17, and almost too old for it, but not quite fully. The way you hold something you were afraid you might lose. "She would have been proud of you," Marcus said. Caleb said nothing. He didn't need to. They stood in the kitchen with the scholarship notification open on the phone on the table, and the application materials spread around them, and the lights of the parking lot coming through the kitchen window. And Marcus thought, this apartment ends now. Not because of the money, not yet, though the money will help. Because of what it means. Because what it has represented. The years of just getting by, of waiting, of being unable to give my son what he should have had. That ends now. He thought about Diane Calloway standing at the hallway window in the Nexagen tower, saying, "I want to be the kind of person who explains it right." He thought about Alicia Morrow, who had kept a project log for 5 years because she had liked a man who treated her like she was there to understand things. He thought about James Osei, working on contingency because he believed cases that couldn't pay him yet. He thought about Elena, who had always said, the right thing takes as long as it takes, and not one day longer or shorter. He thought, it took exactly as long as it took. 3 weeks after the IPO closed successfully at a valuation that gave CoreNet a market value of $430 million, Marcus Webb walked into the Nexagen Systems building for the first time through the front entrance with his own name on the visitor log. Not contractor, not work order 7714. His name. He took the elevator to the 34th floor and walked through the marble lobby past the framed magazine covers on the wall, Forbes, Wired, Fast Company, and past the reception desk where the woman with the copper-painted nails looked up and said, "Mr. Webb, Ms. Calloway is expecting you, 36th floor,
the corner conference room. He took the second elevator to the 36th floor, and the conference room had a view of Atlanta he hadn't seen from this building before, north, toward the neighborhoods where the city got quieter, where the Saturday morning light came through differently. Diane was there, with the prospectus and a bound copy on the table in front of her, and 2 cups of coffee already poured. She slid one toward him when he sat down. "I marked the page," she said. She opened the prospectus to a flagged section near the back, in the technical disclosures, and turned it to face him. He looked at the page. He read the paragraph. The language was precise and accurate, and attributed to him by name the architectural design of CoreNet as the foundational technology of Nexagen Systems, with dates and with the acknowledgement that the original licensing structure had been reformed to reflect accurate ownership history. He read it twice. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said. They sat with their coffee for a moment in the conference room on the 36th floor, with Atlanta going about its Saturday morning below them, and the CoreNet system running on all 14 indicators somewhere in the server room 22 floors below, and the prospectus open between them on a page that said what was true. "I've been thinking," Diane said, "about the board's response to the co-ownership proposal. They approved it, which I expected. What I didn't expect was that 3 of them separately came to me and said it was the right outcome, not just the legal outcome, not just the financially manageable outcome, but the right one." She looked at her coffee. "I've been running this company for 8 years, and I thought I understood what it was about. I thought it was about building the most capable system we could, the best team we could, the most defensible market position we could." She paused. "Turns out you can do all of that and still miss the most important thing." "Which is?" Marcus said. "Who you're standing on," she said. He looked at her across the table. Outside the window, the city was finding its Saturday rhythm, a little slower, a little wider than the week. The particular loosening of a place that had been working hard and was allowing itself to breathe. "I brought something," Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the table between them. A folded paper, old, creased in the way things get creased when they have been folded and unfolded many times over many years. He unfolded it and smoothed it flat on the table. It was a printout of an email, dated January 8th, 2019. From Marcus Webb to the Bridgepath Technologies management address. The subject line, CoreNet v 1.0, Architecture Documentation and IP Notation. The body of the email was 2 paragraphs. The first described the completion of the CoreNet build. The second noted clearly and formally that all intellectual property contained in the system remained under the original licensing structure as defined in the 2017 agreement, and that any modification of that structure would require Marcus's written consent. The email had a read receipt. It had been opened the same day it was sent. Diane read it. She looked up. "I sent that 8 months before the acquisition," Marcus said. "I wanted it documented. I knew something wasn't right. The investor conversations were getting vague. People were talking about a sale and not including me in it. And I sent that because I wanted there to be a record." He looked at the email on the table. Victor saw it. He had to have seen it. And he moved forward anyway. "Because he thought the paper trail would hold," Diane said. "Yes," Marcus said. "He thought the structure was tight enough that the email didn't matter." He paused. He was almost right. For 5 years, he was almost right. Diane looked at the email for another moment. Then she said, "What made you come to Nexagen when you did? You said you'd been preparing for 2 years."
Why now, specifically? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Caleb's interview, he said. The scholarship deadline. I had been waiting for the evidence to be complete, for the case to be airtight, for the moment to be perfect. And then Caleb told me about the scholarship, and I realized there is no perfect moment. There's the moment you decide to go, and there's every other moment that keeps not being it. He looked at the email. He didn't know that was what pushed me, but it was. Diane nodded slowly. A 17-year-old kid who doesn't know he's helping you find your nerve, she said. He'd hate that description, Marcus said. I know, she said. It's probably accurate anyway. He almost smiled. She almost smiled back. What happens now? She said. The auditor's fee determination comes through next week, he said. James says the number is defensible, and I'm not going to dispute it. The co-ownership documentation files at the same time. He looked at the prospectus still open on the table. And then, I don't know. I've been in the mode of fighting this for so long that I haven't thought much about what's on the other side of it. What do you want to be on the other side of it? She said. He looked out the window at the Atlanta morning. I want to build something, he said. I've been maintaining what I built and defending what I built and waiting to be recognized for what I built. I want to build something new. He paused. CoreNet is good, but it's 5 years old. The authentication architecture needs rethinking for what's coming. I've been watching what the field is doing, and there are 3 things I'd do differently if I were starting from scratch. She looked at him across the table. Tell me, she said. And he did. He talked and she listened. And then she asked questions that were the questions of someone who understood the system at the level you understood it, from having run it for 5 years. And he answered them with the specificity of someone who had built it and had spent the time since building it in his head, in the way builders did, revising, rethinking, improving the thing that had already been made, because making was the only thing that felt like itself. Outside the conference room window, Atlanta was fully in its Saturday morning now, the light falling evenly across the rooftops and the highways and the older neighborhoods and the newer ones. And in the Nexagen server room, 22 floors below them, CoreNet was running its authentication sequences with the patient reliability of something built by someone who loved what they were building. Marcus Webb and Diane Calloway sat in the 36th floor conference room for another hour. And what was built in that hour was not yet a thing with a name, not a partnership, not a project, not a plan. But it had the specific quality of the beginning of something which was its own kind of architecture, and which was enough.